Hello, gay men, and welcome to another episode of Coming Inside Out. I'm your host, Mark Dembo, and joining me is my co-host, Brian Janes. How are you today, Brian?
Good to see you, Mark. Exciting day today.
It is an exciting day because every day that I'm with you, Brian, and we get to spend time
Yes,
together
of course.
is an exciting day. So,
Of course. Yes.
But we are really excited because we have joining us on today's episode a really phenomenal guest. I think everybody's going to get a lot out of this conversation. We are joined by Alan Marion, also known as the gay sex coach, and he's going to talk to us about all kinds of things about dating, monogamy, getting in touch with your own sexuality, and so many other topics that are so important. Really, I'd say for all gay men, but especially for those of us coming out later in life and things that everything you always wanted to know about gay sex, but were afraid to ask.
Yes. We talk about living authentically. This is living authentically in a new relationship also,
Yes.
right? It's not
Yeah.
just about living authentically or being in a relationship or not being in a relationship, but it's following through into the relationship.
Exactly. So, Alan will be joining us in just a moment. And just to give everybody a little bit of his background, he is an IICT certified men's sex coach. He's based in New York, and he is a master's candidate in mental health counseling at Russell Sage College. You may know him or follow him or seen some of his content on social media, where he is known as the gay sex coach. And he's got a really direct, honest approach to the conversations that many men were never taught how to have, as we mentioned. His work centers on helping men let go of shame, understanding their desires, and build more authentic relationships with themselves and others. And his style, he's thoughtful, he's real, he's human, and he really brings his lived experiences combined with clinical training into things that many of us are thinking about and working through every day. So
Yes.
we're glad to have Alan join us today.
Yeah. Welcome, Alan.
Welcome, Alan. We are thrilled to have you here with us today. I know you're going to bring a lot of great wisdom and insights for all of our listeners.
Yes.
So,
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much for having me.
Yeah, I'm going to just kind of jump in here and we'll go wherever the conversation takes us. So Alan, you describe your mission as helping gay men reclaim their sexual and relational power. I'd love to understand what really inspired that focus for you, and why is it especially critical for men who are beginning a second chapter in their life, as so many of our listeners are.
Okay, well, that's a really long answer on that, but for the sake of your viewers, I'll try to condense that down to a small story. But a good portion of my story is because it's a lived experience for me. Without getting too deep in the details of my childhood and upbringing, we don't need to go back that far. But I was raised in an evangelical Christian household that was very strict, lots of rules, and was not living my own authentic life. Like many of your viewers, I was in trying to become engaged to a woman and carry out my mission in the church and all of the things that go with that. Fast forward into becoming a young gay man and kind of realizing that, really struggling with that, struggling with spirituality, and then going into a very long marriage to a man where sex just wasn't what it should be and was not celebrated, and a lot of who I was became suppressed. And so all of that culminated, and then as I started reckoning with my own self and who I am sexually, that kind of led to wanting to do this work on a larger scale based on the conversations that I was having with other men and the reception that I got. And then it just sort of transformed and unfolded naturally after that.
Wow.
Alan, you just mentioned growing up in a religious background. And one of the things that we wrote down here was in one of the TikToks that I listened to of yours, highly religious backgrounds and sexual shame. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's any major surprise to your viewers that with many religions across the globe on many different scales, sex is not celebrated. It's something that's strictly looked at for procreation in many religions, or in others, it's just simply not talked about. And so when we get into that area and we are in it for so many years of our life, we tend to build up a lot of walls around it and a lot of shame, especially if we like anything that is outside of what is considered normal sex. And then we learn to just kind of suppress it and push it down and ignore it. And then we blink our eyes, and years have gone by. And we wake up one day and realize that we are not truly sexually satisfied. And when we start to trace those roots back, it begins really with that. I call it religious programming. Other people might call it something different. But based on how I was raised and how many of my clients are raised, programming is definitely a really good word there. And that's
Hmm.
kind of how it evolves.
All right. A lot of our listeners have come out of marriages in highly religious environments, and they're dealing with that shame even after they've come out because their families have disowned them because of the religious beliefs.
That's a tough one. And I see that more frequently than you can imagine. We have the stats and data on uh, at risk youth. We know that gay teens, in particular, are one of the highest concentrations of individuals who are disowned from their families. So that ties in directly to what you're saying. There's a direct correlation there. And we see that shame compounds over time. And one of the things that, if we take this conversation just a tiny bit over to the science world, our nervous systems in our body listen to these conversations, they listen to these messages, and they begin to program the wiring of our body. And then we begin to accept that as normal. And then you end up many years later with just layers and layers of shame and grief and trauma and unhappiness. And it's just a very deep web and many, many layers, again, as mentioned, that we have to unpack and pull apart and look at them from different angles. And deconstruct is probably a really good word to use there.
Okay. Yes.
So I'm curious when you kind of take all these layers, right, of shame and I guess repression that so many men deal with, and I think that's true if you come from a religious background. It also is true for many of our listeners who have been in, let's say, heterosexual relationships and have been suppressing their true sexuality. When you're working with your clients, how do you help people? How do you help men come to an understanding and help letting go of some of that deep rooted shame?
So every client is different, but I have a similar beginning process that I use with each man that I work with or each couple that I work with. And then that transforms based on the individual person. But where I always start, kind of building block A for me, is giving an understanding to men of how we got here. And it's really important. There's two really, really important things to understand is one, I work a lot in the world of psychology with what's called minority stress. And minority stress is a theory that was coined by Elon Meyer in 2003. And in this theory, he talks about that as gay people, we wake up every single day of our life being told that we're broken, different, or wrong. Compound that into living in heteronormative society. We're raised by mom and dad. If we're lucky, we have grandma and grandpa around, and then we have aunts and uncles and cousins. And we have the second part of that equation, which is no gay role models to follow. The only thing many of us saw was the one gay hairdresser in our small town, or the gay florist in our small town, or a random, not well represented personality on TV or in a movie. And in many cases, those were portrayed as negative or deviant. So the first thing that we have to do is kind of frame that in as knowledge and really understand and have that awakening or that moment where we realize since the day you were born, you have never been given access freedom or ability to be your true authentic self. It was shaped for you if you were born into heterosexual families. And, we're living in different times now
Yeah.
where we have two dads. But for most people who are watching this, they were probably raised in a heterosexual family. And that begins the whole process. So that's where we start, is that educational piece and really anchoring that. And you would be surprised. You would think that that's logical or that it's something that's known and talked about, but oftentimes that's a really revelationary piece of information for a lot of men. They've never really taken that step back and realize that and understand it. So that's why you hear me talk about that so much, both in my writing and in my social media videos.
What that kind of brings up for me, because I didn't grow up in a religious background, but I grew up in a background where I was bullied when I was in school. So although I wasn't feeling the shame and the guilt and all of that through a church, I was feeling all of that through my peers when I was a teenager. And that's, was like, oh, I'm wrong, I'm bad because of that versus God.
Mm.
That is a really common theme that I see, particularly with gay men, as many of us did experience bullying to different degrees that usually manifests itself as people pleasing later in life, because what
Yes.
happens is when we're bullied, we then have to compensate and try to figure out how to become accepted in this heterosexual world that we're living in, right? And usually that means being the funny one or the one who fixes things or the nice guy, which
Hmm.
translation is people pleasing. And then that also compounds and builds over the course of our life as well. So for me, I went to a private Christian school, K4 through 12th grade. I never went to a public school. And my school was so small that it was either arts or sports. And I was not a part of either of those communities. So as you can imagine, I became the funny guy, the gregarious one, the one who made people laugh. And that was the way I manifested my people pleasing. And that takes a different form with each man and how they do that. But such an important part of how we shape these early thoughts and feelings.
Wow. I have a question for you. So you come out as gay and you're unpacking your sexuality, you're learning, you're being introduced to who you are for the first time in your life at whatever age it was. For me, it was 50 years old. So you're unpacking that. You're unpacking the people pleasing. What are other characteristics that men coming out later in life are dealing with, are exhibiting?
See a lot in people pleasing, see a lot with shame, a lot with guilt. Also, see there's not really a scientific term for this, but a sense of being unresolved,
Mm,
that we're not fully integrated, and that we live in a compartmentalized, or like what I like to call a bento box style of living, which is I'm going to
yes.
put this here and this here to make life congruent and to make it palatable and manageable, as I go through these different emotions, such as the guilt and the shame. Also, fear. See a lot of fear. That ties directly into people pleasing. And to a certain extent, I also sometimes see self sabotage that will peek
Mm.
in from time to time as well.
Mm.
Wow.
Say
You
more
just went
about
down
that.
my whole list.
So say, I'm curious, kind of the Alex. Say more about the self sabotage piece, because I think that's real. I think there's probably so many of us that do that, but don't realize you're even doing it. So
Yeah.
what, like, how does that show up?
Self sabotage to me kind of puts on a form of drag of I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy enough. And then that can manifest into relationships, us choosing partners that are
Mm.
probably not the best choice for us. It can mean really hiding ourselves in our career, not showing up and living big and living authentic. We tend to shrink a little bit to make sure that we're fitting the norms. Self sabotage can affect us in so many different ways. And most of the time, it's not known to the individual, right? It's something
Yeah.
that we do subconsciously. And so we have to really pull that apart and take a look at it. piece by piece and figure out what part goes where and where it came from and how
Yeah.
we want to avoid that moving forward.
Yeah. That's really interesting, kind of bringing that up. And I've talked about this on the podcast before for myself. I know in my journey of coming out, um, I recognized in my coming out how much of myself I had been hiding, suppressing, engaging in really kind of a lot of that self-sabotage that you're talking about, manifesting in all aspects of life, right? Not just in your personal relationships. And part of that coming out process, I've realized for me, is being able to step in fully into who I am in all aspects of my life. And I think that is, um, you know, you don't perfect it on day one, but it is an ongoing part of the journey, and being able to say, how do I let go of some of that?
That is a key one right there. Like, how do we let go? Each person is different in how they begin the letting go
Mm-hmm.
process. For some, it's easier. For some, it's harder. For some, it requires little tiny baby steps. It's more about themes with me than it is with process. And that is first and foremost letting people move in their own space and time. There is this kind of cultural belief that once we've decided that we know who we are, that we need to come out and be fully out and begin like this process or journey. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Everybody needs to move in their own space, in their own time, in a way that feels authentic to them. And if we don't do that, we can actually really step into some dangerous territory for our own psyche. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to honor that process as we begin to figure out who we are and begin to step into that new us while
Yeah.
still letting go of all of that. When
Yeah.
I think about letting go in particular, it's to me a little bit less about letting go rather than looking into. That's how I choose to phrase that, because what we want to do is offer hope, curiosity, and excitement for this next phase of who we are. If we look at it as this heavy, ogre, dark energy, we tend to associate feelings like failure and not
Mm-hmm.
living up to our true potential, when really we're having, at our age, what I like to call a midlife awakening, right? Like, we have
Mm-hmm.
the possibility, we have the excitement, and we have that curiosity again of what we can step into. So that's how I
Yeah.
like to reframe that a little bit to make it easier for people in the letting go process.
Mm-hmm.
And
When
letting go, by the way, ties a lot back to our heteronormative upbringing. And this is a subject that I get trolled on social media a lot, but letting go of heteronormativity is a really significant piece of letting go.
yes, when I was coming out, you talk about coming out slower or more cautiously. When I was coming out, I felt like that was the first time in my life that I was actually going to feel grounded to something. I felt tethered my entire life because I wasn't living, my truth. And it just felt like, oh, I'm going to come out and it's all going to happen like boom, because I so desperately wanted to be grounded to something.
And I'm going to guess that it probably didn't go that way, right?
It did not. Boy, I talk about, no, it did not. It still isn't, but yes, I came out very quickly, proudly. One, I wanted to celebrate who I had not allowed myself to live for 50 years. But also, I really just wanted a sense of connection to my purpose in life. And I felt like I was hiding that for so long.
Mm.
I think the important thing to what you said is to understand that there's no right or wrong way to come out, and there's no right or wrong speed, and there's no action plan that goes with this, right? So in your case, you came out faster because you wanted connection, and that's great. And for you in your journey, you may go back in retrospect and look at other things and pull them up along to meet your journey, where others may take a slower and more deliberate. One of the things that I feel really passionately about is that we just don't label or inflict what we think is right on others. If you want to come out faster, then let's talk about
Right.
coming out faster. If you want to come out slower, then let's talk about coming out slower. It's what's right for you. One of the things I've learned very, very early on in my career is that if you try to get people to move at your pace, they will never succeed. They must move at their own pace or it will never stick. It won't be
Yeah.
authentic and it simply just won't be congruent with who they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I, I think for anybody coming out, that is true. And I think that becomes even magnified when you come out later in life, because when you think about all the things that go into the coming out process, you know, most of us, we've got families, we've got, kids, you've got your spouse and all of those other things, because you start to realize, wait a minute, there's a whole universe in that is affected by this, and it just creates even more complications. And to your point, it's you've got to take the steps at the timing and the pacing that are right for you.
So I like to think of that as like a casserole, right? It has a lot of different ingredients and it has a
Mm.
lot of different layers. And coming out is almost like building a casserole in such a way. So I'll give you an example of my coming out. Mine was very different in that I was in this Christian school and in church 5 days a week, and I was having same-sex experimentation at 15 and 16 years old with the guys in my church and school, but didn't really know that I was gay until probably my 20s. Didn't
Mm-hmm.
talk to my mom about it until my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't step into my career until my 30s. So you've got all these different parts of the casserole,
Yep.
right? And it looks very different. It's not linear. So it can be addressed at different times and different moments and different people. You also have to assemble your new chosen family, which we talk a
Mm.
lot about in the community, and that's another layer of your
Yeah.
casserole. So none of it's linear and none of it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back to you were talking about the heteronormativity that we grow up in, right? It's societal expectations. Let's take that into men or people coming out later in life that have not only had the heteronormative view ideals of society, but have lived that life. Now you come out and suddenly you've got this whole world and you don't even know where to begin. How do I meet people? How do I date? How do I deal with sex? And I know for a lot of men coming out, right? I mean, some may have had earlier experiences or did throughout a marriage. Many haven't, but so all of a sudden it's like, how do I start to understand, what do I like? How do I find what I like? Um, Combined with what we were talking about before, letting go of some of the shame that even though you're out, you may still feel associated with it. So I'm, curious, what are your thoughts on kind of where do you begin to try and understand, what does that look like for me now?
That is a multi-prong answer, if you will, in that there's a couple of things that need to happen. There's logistics and then there's internal. And step one for me is internally getting really clear on your needs, wants, and desires. And this is so much harder for men than you can ever imagine. It's something that I work with on a daily basis. Just men speaking their truth out loud about what turns them on and what doesn't turn them on. And you would think that that would be inherently natural and easy, but I'm here to tell you it's one of the hardest things that men at this phase in their life have to reckon with. And typically, I find in the vast majority of the men that I work with that they have wants, needs, and desires that at some point they've either been told that they are kinky, taboo, wrong, dirty, nasty, or shameful. So then we have to reconcile that. And that kind of begins as step one, is getting true with self. Like, what do I really want? What do I want sexually? What do I want emotionally? Do I want monogamy? Do I want monogamish? Do I want non-monogamy? These are all things that men need to reckon with internally first before they get into the logistical piece. The logistical piece is a completely different animal, because while I wish I had a beautiful rainbow puppies and kittens answer, finding community can be challenging because our community looks and feels many different ways. It has many different doors and many different hallways. Some may default to a bar scene, and that's great. If you enjoy dancing and shaking your ass, then go out and have a great time. Some may default to apps if they are more quiet in nature and not as able to go into a bar and just strike up a conversation. And then that kind of starts going down a little bit of a rabbit hole of, where does the man live? Because one of the things that we know is, the smaller the town that you're in, the less access you have to community.
Sure.
And that is an unfair, hard truth, but it's one that I have to work with daily. Men
Yep.
that I work with in very small towns have very different access and resources than what we have here in New York, right? I was telling somebody, you can be any type of gay in New York that you want to. If you want to be in a gay pickleball league, we have it.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be
Right.
in a gay art collectors
Yep.
club, we have it. We have
Yep.
everything here. But if you're in small town USA, the only access you might have is apps or a bar.
Yep.
So finding community, I wish I could say, was an easy piece of this journey, but it's not. But we're able to navigate that with some careful thought and some planning and some intention, uh, depending on the man and kind of where they live, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
those are the
Absolutely.
the two entry level steps that I would go back to for your original question.
Yeah. How about sexual exploration?
Sexual exploration tends to fall kind of in that same field, right? Like, how do we go out and get the experience? And one of the things that I see a lot is, I want the experience, but I don't want to be a hoe, right? Like, I don't want to go out and just start sleeping around all over town. So that becomes a reconcile process, right? Like, how do you get experience without having this negative feeling attached to it? But also, how do you get enough experience to know what you like and what you don't like, so that
Right.
you're not settling down with the first person that comes along that may or may not be the right fit for you? And that in and of itself is a whole other, can of unicorns that we pop open and take a look at. But there's, again, not a super easy way to answer that question, because it also ties back to where we live and what we have access to. For some, it may mean finding sexual opportunities on apps. It may be at the gym for some people. It may be public cruising for others. And it really just varies tremendously, again, based on what the person has access to.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wish I had a pretty bow to put on that question, but
Yeah.
unfortunately,
Right.
there
There isn't
there
like a
just isn't
guide. There isn't a
one.
manual to say.
No, there is not. I wish I could write one, but I would have to classify it by every city in the United States, and that would be tough.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Alan, I want to take a moment. I'm going to promote your TikTok page if you want to tell the listeners about your TikTok page, because that's how I first discovered you. And you do all of these like 45 to a minute kind of TikToks, and you talk about a lot of these issues on your TikTok, and I'm sure other social media pages also. So where can people tune in to if they want to find out about kinks and shame and religion and monogamish? Where do you have those social media sites?
Super easy. I am the gay sex coach on everything. So I'm the gay sex coach on Instagram, TikTok, and most importantly, Substack as well. So the two largest platforms that I have are, oddly enough, TikTok for a 56-year-old man, and then Substack. I have not been able to conquer Instagram. I don't really know why. It just can't seem to build the community there that I have on TikTok and Substack. But those are the primary places that you can find me. And then, of course, my website is the same name, thegaysexcoach.com.
Okay. I listen to every one of your podcasts or every one of your TikToks. I listen to all of them. I have a question. I have a multifaceted question that I wrote down that I would like to ask you just based on hearing your TikToks. And I was in a monogamous relationship with my wife for 30 years. I trusted her. She trusted me. I didn't cheat on her to the best of my ability. She didn't cheat on me. We didn't use any type of safety medications or anything to protect each other from STDs because we trusted each other. On your TikToks, you talk about monogamous couples, but you also talk about the don't ask, don't tell culture. Are the monogamous couples that you're seeing, are they on doxy or PrEP medications? And if they're not, how do the don't ask, don't tell men protect their partners that aren't on medications because they think that they're in a monogamous relationship? Because for me, my goal is to be in a monogamous relationship, and I don't want to worry about taking medications if I believe I'm in a monogamous relationship. Am I naive in this thinking?
You are not naive. This is a bit of an explosive question because it has so many different fireworks as answers. So let me try to answer all of the nuances there. First and foremost, with monogamous couples, I would say the vast majority of the monogamous couples that I work with are not on any sort of medication such as Doxy or PrEP.
Okay.
Typically, most of the couples that I work with have been together in excess of 15 years. I'm working with some couples that have been together in the 30 plus year category. And they just foundationally believe that the other one is adhering to the rules of the relationship and they have chosen not to be on medication. And beyond that, I don't usually get a deeper view into what's going on behind the scenes unless one of them shares stories about infidelity, which of course we need to talk about honesty in the relationship and making sure that we're talking about that. With monogamish or don't ask, don't tell, or consensual non monogamy, they're all three wildly different things. I do see a lot of people on Doxy and PrEP and those things. I think it's really important to know that those are great for what they do, but they don't protect against everything. So I just like to make sure that we're grounded in education and knowing what we can and can't deal with in terms of potential exposure and making sure that we're just taking care of our bodies as best we can there. And then one of the other things that I've kind of learned specifically to your question about don't ask, don't tell, this is where it gets dicey. And unfortunately, these are times that sometimes I see and hear information that doesn't always resonate as most healthy, but that's my job to get in there and kind of dig and pick and plunder with this. I've seen instances in Don't Ask, Don't Tell where one was secretly on medication and not telling the other partner about it. And then others who just adhere to kind of what I call old school Catholic protection, pulling out early and avoiding bodily fluids and things of that nature. If you can name it, I have probably seen it somewhere in that spectrum.
Wow. All right. So my concern for myself is that if I'm in a relationship where I believe I'm in a monogamous relationship and my partner tells me we're monogamous, I'm not going to be taking a medication, right? Why should I? Why would I? But in this culture, especially if you're in a relationship and maybe this isn't true, but I'm thinking if your partner cheated on their previous partner, they're more likely to do it again. Correct? Is there more of a
Yes
likelihood
and
of
no.
that?
Yes and no. I wish I could answer that cleanly, but I can't. But I'm going to back the question up just a little bit to give a broader perspective here to kind of bring this point in. What we really want to get to is, and the heavy lifting of the work that I do, this is where I spend a huge amount of time, just so you know. This is like a big piece of work that I do with men, is we want to get to a point where we are able to have a completely authentic and vulnerable relationship with our partner to be able to discuss anything without fear of being reprimanded, scolded, judged, inflicted shame, guilt, or fear. That is step one. If that is not happening in the relationship, you will eventually end up in don't ask, don't tell, or going outside of the rules of the relationship, or ending up in territory where you don't want to be. So getting to honesty is the first step in that. And I will tell you, when you can get to that place with your partner, it is the most incredibly liberating and freeing you will ever. It is the truest form of authenticity that you can live as a man, because you are able to discuss anything and everything without fear, and without fear of
Yes.
abandonment or being left behind by your partner. And I can tell you, I've been on both sides of the fence of that, right? In my marriage, that didn't happen, which led me to drive a lot of my desire underground. And then fast forward, the man that I'm with now, we discuss quite literally everything. And we don't hide things either. Like if we, in my marriage, and I don't want to speak poorly of my marriage, it was 21 years and there were some really great times and there were some really challenging times, just like every relationship. And it was a mutual ending. But in my old relationship, if I were walking in Home Depot and saw a hot guy, I could not have looked, because that would have just been like, that would have been an
Mm-hmm.
all out fight or war. In my
Mm-hmm.
current relationship, if we see someone that's handsome, we are secure enough in each other to know that we are not going to chase that guy down an aisle, marry him, and run away with him. We are able to acknowledge that's a really handsome man, and that's all it is. But you would be surprised at how many couples
Yeah.
don't live like that. So it's a
Yes.
very small example of, I want to try to avoid getting you to the point where you're in a monogamous relationship where that wasn't step one. Because if not, you're going to have to go back and build
Yeah.
step one to get to where you want to be, to have a happy and healthy monogamous relationship.
Yeah.
What you described, I can't speak for Mark, I'll just speak for myself. I was in a relationship with my wife where we shared so much of our life, but there were things obviously that I couldn't share, and then we had things that we didn't share. So, how you described a relationship with a man and just being able to be 100% honest and open with them, that's what I want in a relationship. That's exactly what I want.
And so that brings, at least from my train of thought here, back to the whole concept around so many of us, all of us, being programmed towards heteronormativity. And correct me if I'm off base here, but in heteronormative society, there is one right way to have a relationship, and that's a monogamous relationship. Within the gay community, it can be many things, right? I mean, Alan, you mentioned, right? You can have don't ask, don't tell. You can have monogamy. You can have consensual non-monogamy. You can have a free for all. And to me, it seems that the key here, right, is communication. How do you work with, and I'm thinking especially from the view of so many of us, again, coming out later in life, how do you help determine what's the right path? And especially if you have one, you could have a couple that clearly love each other, but may have differing views on the sexual part of the relationship. How do you help navigate that and determine what works for a relationship?
I love this question. Thank you for answering it. This is my wheelhouse.
Well,
This
I
is where I
asked it. I
live.
want you to answer
I love this question, so thanks
it.
for asking. Step one is we have to get out of our own way and be able to put the tough conversation in the middle of the room and have the
Mm,
damn tough conversation. And you would think, as men, first and foremost, that we would step into tough conversations, but I can safely tell you that about 90% of the men that I work with won't and avoid. We have to, as step one, be able to throw that tough conversation into the room while we're dating. What does a relationship look like to you? Do you lean monogamous or monogamish or open? We have to be able to normalize having these conversations, and in doing so in a way that's curious. So if you've watched my videos and read my writing, you know curious is a word that I use over and over and over and over. When we lose curiosity, we lose perspective and we lose the ability to think critically and we lose the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes and experience life in a new way, in a way that they are experiencing it. And it really cuts off joy and pleasure and connectedness. So curious is a big word for me. So hold on to that. From there, it's also, you know, again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, is getting really quiet with yourself and getting really clear on what you want, what you think you want. Do you, and this is not a loaded question, so please know that, because one of the things I get trolled on TikTok a lot when I go into the monogamy, non-monogamy conversation. I mean, I get dragged. So let me be very clear before I say what I'm about to say. It is not my job as a professional to advocate for relationship structures or types.
Hmm.
There are two types of relationships to me: honest ones and dishonest ones. That's it. Whether it's monogamous, non-monogamous, that's all noise to me. I need to know what's right for the couple. The only two are, again, honest and dishonest. That's how I
Yeah.
view relationships. So from there, we need to get really quiet. With that being said, you know, can you, and this is a really terrible analogy, but it's used over and over again, you know, can you see yourself waking up every single day of the rest of your life wanting chocolate ice cream when there is Rocky Road and chocolate chip out there? And if the answer to that is yes, then let's proceed forward. If the answer is I'm not sure, okay, then we've got a place for that on the shelf. Because one of the things that I'll tell you is that oftentimes with two men in a relationship, one of the things that I'm starting to see more and more is that relationships change over time. So
Hmm.
we may start off monogamous, and then we may have moments of exploration and curiosity. Now, where people get really upset with me is that they don't understand that this is a spectrum, and that is a wide spectrum. For some, it may mean getting an erotic couples massage after they've been together 5 years, and that's
Hmm.
their version of exploring more.
Hmm.
Some may be together 10 years and decide they want to try one three-way
Hmm.
and then never do it again. It's a spectrum, but we tend to think of it in terms of either we're monogamous or we are all out having sex with 500 people in the course of a year
Right.
behind our
Right.
partner's back. And that really couldn't be further from the truth. So step one, getting really clear on what we want. And step two, being able to have that conversation with people that we are interested in romantically or more, and being able to start, you know, kind of aligning those and driving those forward, but then also staying really open and curious about evolution and change over time.
Hmm.
And I see it all. One of the couples that I'm working with, 34 years, monogamous. Um, it can be done.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I think is important also, and you've touched on this, is in the communication you're having with your partner or whoever you're dating somebody, what do you define as cheating? Because I think in one of your videos, you know, is if you're watching porn, is that you as a couple, do you agree that that's cheating or not cheating? If you're on an app, is that cheating or not cheating? So what defines your monogamous or monogamish relationship, and having that hard conversation so that neither person is caught off guard when they maybe discover that their partner is doing one of these things.
So wildly important, what you just said, is the ability, first and foremost, no one should be creating the rules except the couple themselves. And that's one of the things that I think we forget because we have so much coming at us in social media, right? Like social media is telling us what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. And then if you have layers of religion and then your heteronormative upbringing, you have all of this noise going on in your head. But at the end of the day, it is between you and your partner to decide the rules of the relationship. Now, sometimes men come to me because they need help navigating the rules. They're trying to co-create them together, and sometimes there's a difference, and we have to reconcile what's going to work for the couple. In the vast majority of cases, most men are able to do this with each other directly one on one without help from somebody like me. But that's when we have to get really real with each other and understand a few things. And this is where, you know, my style. that I'm known for as being direct and grounded and honest. I don't live in the kind of spiritual realm, if you will, with my explanations. I tend to attack things head on, very direct. And in that spirit, men need time alone to masturbate. And that does not matter if you are in the happiest monogamous relationship of your life. You need time alone to yourself. Whether or not that includes porn, you need to look at that from a relationship perspective and define it as cheating. I don't. I think it can lead down a dangerous trail when it is used in substitution for intimacy in the relationship. That's when I get concerned. If a guy just wants to take 10 minutes on Pornhub and get off just because he is so stressed out that if he doesn't get that release, there's going to be a hostage situation, then go do it. But if we're
Mm-hmm.
replacing intimacy in the relationship with porn, then that's something else we need to look at. But only the couple should be defining that. Not me, not social media, not the Bible, not our parents, not our grandparents, just the couple itself.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody, this has been such a great conversation with Alan. And there is a lot more. We had a phenomenal discussion with him that just kept going and going and going. So we're going to make this a two-parter. So stay tuned for part 2 with Alan Marion, the gay sex coach.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Mark. Bye.
Okay.